The were retired at 63 and bought a small weatherboard batch on the Coromandel Peninsula so I could finally hear the sea instead of traffic. The 8 years at a civil engineering firm in Hamilton had given me a good deal. A solid pension, a bad back, and a deep, the world understanding of what silence actually sounds like when you've been without it long enough. The batch was on a gravel road off Highway 25, about 2 kilometers north of Wishanga. The 3 bedrooms, a sun-facing deck, a narrow strip of lawn that ran down to a bank of pahutukawa trees, and beyond those, the Hauraki Gulf stretching out like something you'd find in a painting rather than real life. The seller, an older woman named Irene who'd inherited it from her late husband, had kept it meticulously. The world tilted sideways, every Remu floorboard gleamed. The weatherboards had been freshly painted a deep charcoal. The wood stove in the lounge was the kind you could heat a small hall with. The world papers at the solicitor's office in Whitianga on a Tuesday morning in late March. $485,000. The world tilted sideways, saved across nearly 4 decades of early mornings and working through Christmas breaks, and eating the same sandwiches my wife had packed until she passed. The world tilted sideways 7 years before I ever saw that batch in a listing. I drove straight from the solicitor's to the back, sat on the deck with a thermos of tea. The words watched a white-faced heron pick its way along the waterline below the pahutukawas. I didn't look at my phone. I didn't think about anything pressing. I just watched the heron until it was gone. Then I watched the water. My son Nate rang me that evening. "Dad, you're actually in, sitting on my deck watching the tide come in?" "Mate." He laughed. An easy, warm laugh. "Absolutely deserve this." The world tilted sideways, talked for half an hour. He told me about his job at an architectural firm in Auckland, about the suburb he and his wife, Petra, had been saving to buy in. The world tilted sideways. He sounded stretched in the way people do when they're holding more than they're letting on, but he sounded happy enough. I asked after Petra. He said she was well. The word parents had been staying with them since February. Some issue with their rental in Tauranga, a landlord dispute. The place had apparently been unlivable. Temporarily, Nate said. The world tilted sideways at most. I heard something shift in the way he said it, but I let it go. It was a good evening. They made beans on toast on the little gas hob and ate them on the deck as the stars came out over the Gulf. That conversation with Nate was on a Wednesday. Petra rang on the Friday. The world tilted sideways. I was down at the waterline throwing a stick for a neighbor's dog that had wandered over. I saw her name on the screen and felt the same mild alertness I always felt when Petra called. The world tilted sideways. She had clear ideas. She was not, in 4 years of marriage to my son, someone who rang to chat. "Lawrence," she said. "No hello." That told me something. The world tilted sideways. "I'll come straight to the point. Mom and Dad's situation at Nate's has become untenable. It's too small for 4 adults and they need somewhere they can actually have space." The world tilted sideways. "You've got 3 bedrooms at the back and you're on your own. We think it makes sense for them to come and stay with you through winter." The world too into spring. I threw the stick again and watched the dog race after it. "You think it makes sense?" I said. "You've got the room, Lawrence. It's not like you're going to fill 3 bedrooms yourself." "Petra, I took possession of this property 5 days ago." The world means it's sorted and ready. "Look, Mom and Dad are reasonable people. They won't be underfoot. Dad likes to fish. He'll probably barely see you." "Has Nate agreed to this?" A pause. A telling one. "The Nate supports what's best for my parents." "That's not what I asked." "Lawrence." Her voice took on a particular quality I'd heard before. Steady, deliberate. The world faint edge of someone who considers discussion itself an imposition. "You are a 63-year-old man on his own in a 3-bedroom house. The world parents are in their late 60s and they need somewhere stable. This is exactly the kind of situation where family steps up. If you're not willing to do that, the word perhaps you need to ask yourself what you're actually using that property for." I looked out at the Gulf. Flat and green, gray in the late afternoon light. Were they thinking of arriving? I asked. "Would aim for Tuesday. They can drive up from Auckland. Nate says you can show them where things are." "The wor'll be in touch," I said. "Don't make this complicated, Lawrence. They're good people." She ended the call. I stood at the waterline for a long time after that. The world tilted his dog sitting at my feet looking up at me with an expression of uncomplicated goodwill. 5 days. That was how long I'd had my peace. I went back to the back, sat at the kitchen table. The words opened my notebook. The same brand I'd used for site notes for 38 years. Pale blue cover, ruled pages. I wrote down everything Petra had said as close to verbatim as I could manage. The were noted the time. Then I made a fresh pot of tea and started thinking. I hadn't spent nearly 4 decades in engineering by panicking. The world tilted solved problems by understanding the load before I designed the structure. The first call I made on Saturday morning was to my solicitor in Wishanga, a man named Alec who had the one hurried manner of someone who dealt with enough urgency to know that most of it was unnecessary. "The world just settled on the Coromandel property," I said. I'd like to understand my legal position if someone tries to occupy it without my consent. Alec was thorough. Under the Trespass Act, the world person asked to leave private property who refuses to do so is committing an offense. I could request police attendance. The key, he said, was documentation. Any communication establishing that I had not consented to the arrangement. Anything in writing was better than verbal. Video or audio was better still. Are you expecting trouble? He asked. Though I'm expecting people who don't take no for an answer. Then document everything from now. Next I rang my insurance broker, a woman I'd used for years named Sandra, who worked out of a brokerage in Cambridge. The word what happened to my home and contents cover if undeclared long-term occupants moved in. She was very clear. My policy covered me as the sole named occupant. The long-term guests, defined as anyone staying beyond 30 days, needed to be declared and the policy adjusted. The undeclared occupants could void liability cover if an incident occurred on the property. Are you thinking of renting it out? She asked. I'm thinking of making sure I'm protected, I said. The world tilted sideways. Saturday noon I drove to the hardware shop in Wishanga and bought 2 wireless security cameras. The kind that send motion alerts to your phone and store footage in the cloud. I also bought a quality deadbolt for the front door and a solid padlock for the shed. The man at the counter helped me choose the cameras. Installing yourself, he asked. Were reading engineering drawings since before you were born, I said. He laughed. I installed both cameras on Sunday. One under the front eave facing the driveway, the one at the rear of the batch facing the deck and the path down to the waterline. I tested both on my phone, adjusted the angles, verified the motion sensitivity. The engineer in me was satisfied. The world till evening. Nate rang. His voice was careful in the way it gets when he's being monitored. Dad, Petra tells me you haven't confirmed about her parents yet. That's right. A breath. Look. The world tilted sideways, and I know you've just moved in, but they really are in a tough spot. Nate, I'd like to ask you something. Did you agree to this arrangement? The world, you informed of it. Silence, because there's a difference, I said. Dad, did Petra ask me before telling her parents to pack their bags? Did she ask you? The silence was longer this time. I think she thought it was the obvious solution, he said finally. The world tilted sideways. I'm sure she did. But the answer is no, son. I'm sorry if that puts you in a difficult position, but I didn't buy this property to hand it over to people I've met half a dozen times. The word it to retire in. He went quiet. I could hear something in the background, a door closing. I'll talk to her, he said quietly. I'm sorry, Dad. Don't apologize to me. The world tilted sideways, and after we hung up I sat on the deck in the dark. The Gulf was invisible, just sound, the swell moving through the Potukawas. The world tilted sideways, the occasional cry of a shearwater somewhere out in the dark. I knew it wasn't finished. People like Petra don't accept the first no. I'd worked with people like her. You had to be 3 moves ahead. Tuesday came and went. I didn't hear from Petra. The Wednesday afternoon the front camera sent an alert to my phone. A silver Prius had turned into the driveway. The watched on the little screen as it rolled to a stop and 2 people got out. A man and a woman, both around their late 60s. Petra's parents, Wal and Denise. I knew them from 3 Christmas dinners and 1 birthday that Petra had organized at a restaurant in Ponsonby. Wal was a compact, brisk man who had strong opinions about public transport. The world carried herself with the exhausted dignity of someone who considered the world perpetually inadequate. I met them at the front door. Wal, Denise, this is unexpected. Wal put out his hand. The world, Florence. Good to see you. Petra said you'd be settled in by now. I've been settled in for 9 days. Did Petra tell you I hadn't agreed to this arrangement? Denise's expression flickered. I'm sure there's been a miscommunication. There hasn't. I told Petra directly. The answer is no. The world put his hands on his hips and looked out at the Gulf and then back at me with the expression of a man who's been told something inconvenient that he intends to disregard. Look, Lawrence. The world tilted sideways. We're reasonable people. We're not asking for the world. We just need a few months somewhere quiet while the rental situation gets sorted. You've got 3 bedrooms. The world, it's a big place for one man. 38 years of work paid for this place, I said, including the bedrooms. No one suggesting otherwise. Wal's voice shifted slightly, but family helps family. That's how it works. You're Nate's father. We're Nate's wife's parents. That makes us family. Nate's wife's parents, I said. We've eaten Christmas dinner together twice. Lawrence. Denise stepped forward. You're being unnecessarily difficult. We've driven 4.5 hours. We have our bags in the boot. Surely you can. The world, to be very clear, I said. I did not agree to this. I told Petra directly. You are not staying here. I'd like you to get back in your car. Wal's face went through several colors. The world tilted. This is outrageous. We don't have anywhere to go tonight. The Wishanga Hotel on Blacksmith Lane will have rooms. There's also a motor camp on the waterfront. The world had suggest one of those. Petra is going to hear about this. I expect she already knows. Denise had her phone out before they reached the car. The Prius reversed down the driveway and disappeared. Then I went inside and checked the camera footage. Clear audioed, every word time-stamped. I saved it to 2 separate locations. The World Tilted's voicemail came within 40 minutes. Her voice was controlled, which was worse than if she'd been shouting. The World tilted sideways. I don't know what you think you're doing, but humiliating my parents like that is not something I'm going to forget. You think this is over? It isn't. We're going to have a serious conversation about your behavior, and I promise you, you're going to regret treating my family this way. I saved that message too. That evening Nate rang again. He sounded hollowed out. Dad, Petra's very upset. I imagine she is. Her parents are in a motel in Wood. Good, it's a perfectly comfortable town. Date. Did you know they were coming up today? A pause. Petra said she thought you'd come around. She sent her parents to my door without telling me. The World tilted sideways. I'd cave when they were standing in front of me. That's not a miscommunication. That's a strategy. More silence. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything tonight. Get some sleep. The World tilted sideways. For 2 weeks after that there was quiet. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that sits like weather about to turn. I spent those weeks the way I'd always handled the uncertain phase of a complex job. I rang Alec again, updated him on events, asked him to draft a short letter confirming my ownership and my refusal of consent to any third-party occupancy. Something I could hand over in person or send by registered post if needed. The World tilted sideways. I also put in a call to a man I'd worked alongside years ago, a retired policeman named Phil Drummond who'd done some investigative work on the side since leaving the force. The word on the same Lions Club committee in Hamilton for years. I asked if he could find out anything about Wal Pearson's background, financial history, any relevant public records. The World wasn't sure what I was looking for. Something about the way Petra had pushed. The speed of it, the certainty that I would fold, suggested there was more underneath. The worrying me back in 10 days. What he found kept me awake. Wal had been a partner in a property management company that had wound up 3 years earlier with significant creditor debt. The Tauranga rental Petra had mentioned, the one with the supposed landlord dispute, didn't match any known tenancy at the address she'd given Nate. The World tilted. Phil tracked to Wal and Denise was a property they had vacated in January. Not because of a dispute as far as he could find, because of 6 months of missed rent. But the part that sat heaviest was this: Phil had found, through a contact, the World been in a pattern of transfers from Nate and Petra's joint account to an account connected to Wal's former business. 17 transfers over 8 months. The World tilted sideways. Phil couldn't get the exact total through the channels available to him. It wasn't a police matter, but the pattern was consistent with something between $40,000 and $60,000. What? The World tilt sat with that information for 3 days. I thought about my son, the boy who used to come into the garage on Saturday mornings to watch me work on the old Holden. The World hoot on an upturned crate with a Milo and asked questions about how engines worked. Who'd got into architecture because he loved the idea of designing spaces that worked for people. The rung me from Wellington when he passed his registration and said, "Dad, I did it," in a voice that was trying very hard not to crack. Not telling him would let the bleeding continue. The World tilted sideways. Telling him might break something that couldn't be repaired. In the end I did what I've always done when a structure is compromised. You don't pretend the fault isn't there. You address it honestly. The World, or eventually the whole thing comes down. I texted Nate and asked him to come up on his own for the weekend. No particular reason given, just come. The World on the Saturday just before noon in the old Honda he'd had since his 20s. When he stepped out of the car, I saw immediately that he was thinner than last Christmas. The World tilted sideways. The kind of thing that comes from not sleeping and carrying something heavy for too long. His eyes had a watchfulness about them that hadn't been there the year before. The went out on the kayaks in the morning, just paddled. I didn't say anything weighty and neither did he. The World tilted sideways, and the sky was pale, and a pair of gannets wheeled over the outer edge of the bay. In the afternoon we sat on the deck with cold bottles of Spates and watched the tide go out. Nate, I said, I need to ask you something straight. Go on. How much money have you given Petra's parents in the past year? He went very still. I've had someone look into Wal's background. Your joint account was connected to his business filings. The transfers came up. The World tilted sideways. He stood up, walked to the railing and looked out at the water with his back to me. When he turned around there were tears on his face and he wasn't trying to hide them. He'd started small, he said. The we're on here, a short-term thing there. Petra would come to me and say her dad was in a tight spot just for a month or so, and I'd think, well, it's her family. The World, you can for family. He shook his head slowly. I didn't know it had become that much. How much do you think it is? He rubbed his face with the back of his hand. The World tilted tried to work it out. I can't. I haven't gone through all of it. I've been afraid to. The figure Phil found was somewhere between 40 and 60,000. Nate sat back down. The world looked at the label on his bottle without seeing it. That was for the house deposit, he said quietly. We were supposed to put an offer in on a place in Blockhouse Bay by June. So we've been saving since we got married. I know. Does Petra know you know? No, he was quiet for a long while. Below us, the water was retreating, exposing the dark sand and the shells the Patukawas drop in autumn. She told me it was all sorted, he said. For the Tauranga rental, the landlord, all of it. She handled everything. I trusted her to be straight with me. She's been protecting her parents at your expense. I said. That's not malice. Maybe. But it's not honesty. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. What do I do, Dad? I can't tell you that. The world tilted sideways. But you need to see what you're dealing with clearly before you decide anything. Here. I handed him the printed notes from Phil. He read them sitting on the deck in the afternoon light. The word he looked up, his face had changed. Not cracked, clarified. The world tilted sideways. He stayed the night. We didn't talk about Petra or her parents again. In the morning I made scrambled eggs and we ate them at the kitchen table listening to the radio. The world tilted sideways, and for a while it's like he's 19 again, sitting in my kitchen in Hamilton after his mother's funeral, just needing to be somewhere steady. The word he left on the Sunday, he held on to the hug longer than usual. Thanks, Dad, for not staying out of it. Go home and look at your accounts, I said. All of them? The world tilted sideways. Before you talked to her. I watched his car disappear around the bend in the gravel road and then went back inside and waited. The world tilted's response came on the following Thursday. Not a phone call, a letter, hand-delivered, which meant she'd either driven up herself or had someone leave it in the letterbox. No return address. The world tilted sideways, a single type page informing me that she and Nate had sought legal advice regarding the property, that my behavior in turning away her parents had caused measurable harm, and that they would be exploring their options. She used the phrase family obligation 3 times. I scanned the letter and forwarded it to Alec within the hour. The world tilts is a pressure tactic, Alec said when he rang me back. There's no legal basis here. You own the property outright, she has no claim. But save it, it adds to the pattern if anything escalates. The world tilted. Later something else arrived, a letter from the local council's community well-being team. Someone had made an inquiry on my behalf anonymously, expressing concern about an isolated elderly resident on a rural property showing signs of confusion and social withdrawal. The worder requested I contact them to arrange a check and visit. I rang Alec again. This is a known tactic, he said, with the same steady tone I'd come to rely on. The world sometimes used to pressure older property owners. Document your receipt of this letter. Cooperate fully with the visit. The word them see how you actually live. The well-being worker who came 3 days later was a young woman named Kayla, calm, professional, clearly experienced. She walked through the back. The world tilted me questions about my daily routine, my support network, my health. I answered plainly. Made her a cup of tea, showed her my workshop in the shed, the kayaks, the books stacked on the shelves in the lounge. The world tilted sideways to Renwick. She said before she left, this referral contains some claims about your situation that don't match what I'm seeing here. I'm obligated to follow up on the source details. The world Tony asked, has there been any family conflict recently? My daughter-in-law wanted her parents to stay here without my agreement. I said no. Shortly after that, the world tilter said there would be consequences. Kayla made a careful note. The referral was submitted online from an Auckland IP address. She said, I'm noting in my file that this appears inconsistent with the well-being concerns raised. The referral was closed inside a fortnight. Unsubstantiated, but by then something else had shifted. The world tills rang on a Wednesday evening. He'd gone through the accounts, properly with a forensic eye, the way he looks at a set of structural drawings. What he found went further than Phil's estimate. The world threw $3,000 transferred over 11 months. A joint credit card opened in his name 2 years earlier that he hadn't applied for. A personal loan from a finance company in Tauranga that he hadn't known existed, with his name as the primary borrower and his payslips, which Petra had access to, listed as income verification. The world defined the loan, I asked. A credit check. I'd never done one on myself before. Why would you? He laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that has nothing happy in it. The world tilted sideways. $2,000 outstanding on it. I have no idea what the money was used for. I said nothing for a moment. Dad, she said she was handling things. The worked long hours and I let her handle things because I trusted her. And because I thought she loved me. The world thinks she does love you in her way. But she loves her parents more and she's never had to choose before. She chose. She just didn't tell me she was choosing. I could hear him moving. The world tilted sideways, the sounds of the apartment around him. I asked her about it last night. She cried. She said she was trying to protect me from stress. Her dad was in a worse position than she'd let on, and she couldn't see her parents on the street. He paused. And then I asked her about the welfare referral on you, about whether she'd made it. What did she say? She said you'd humiliated her parents and you deserved to know how it felt. There was a long silence. I'm so sorry. Dad. Don't apologize for her actions. What are you going to do? I've made an appointment with a solicitor for Friday, and I'm staying at a mate's place in Kingsland for now. Another pause. The world tilted sideways. I don't know how to feel about the fact that it was standing your ground about the batch that made me actually see it. The whirls, it takes something stopping before you notice it was broken. Yeah. He came up the following weekend, just him. We went out on the kayaks again, and this time we talked properly, the way fathers and sons don't often manage. The world tilted sideways. He talked about Peter not with anger but with the specific grief of someone who'd loved a person and is now reconstructing an honest picture of who that person actually was. I listened, though I didn't tell him what to think. That wasn't my job. The world tilted sideways. On Saturday evening we cooked snapper on the barbecue. He'd bought it from the fish shop in town, and we sat out on the deck until it was properly dark and the stars over the Gulf were thick enough to feel close. I think I knew something was wrong for a while, he said. I just didn't want to be the one who made it real. That's human, I said. That's not weakness. What made you so sure from the start? About her parents. I thought about it for a moment. The wasn't about her parents, I said. It was about the way she didn't ask, she announced, and she'd already told them before she'd spoken to me. The world tilted sideways, which meant the whole thing was arranged assuming I'd have no real say. That tells you what someone believes about you and what you're owed. The world tells you more than the request itself does. He thought about that. She always did that, he said slowly, with small things too. Telling me what we were doing on the weekend. Telling her family what we'd agreed when we hadn't yet. I thought it was just how she was. We sat quietly for a while. Below us the tide was well in, the Putuka was just visible in the dark. I'm glad you said no. So am I. The legal process took time, the way these things do. Nate's solicitor engaged Petra's. There were difficult conversations about the credit card, the loan, the transfers. The world tiltained she'd done what was necessary for her parents' welfare. Her solicitor was capable. So was Nate's. In the end, an agreement was reached that acknowledged the debts. They outlined a repayment plan from Petra's assets and addressed what remained of the house deposit fund. Petra attempted, through her solicitor, to raise a claim against the batch. The world tilted sideways. Was creative if nothing else. That money she'd transferred to her parents had actually been a loan advanced by the family unit, of which I was a part. The word had entitled her to a stake in my property. Nate rang me the afternoon he heard about it, and I could tell he was bracing to apologize. Let me guess, I said. She's going after the back. Her solicitor lodged a letter of claim today. Whatever documentation you have. If she pushes forward, I'll contest it fully. Everything goes on record. The forensic accounting, the welfare referral. The world tilted sides alone in your name. 2 weeks later, Petra's solicitor withdrew the claim. No explanation given. Some positions, once properly examined, can't be defended. The separation was finalized 6 months after that. Nate came up the week the papers were signed. A nice bottle of Marlboro Sauvignon Blanc, and we sat on the deck drinking it in the late afternoon, watching the light do what it does to the Coromandel water at 4 o'clock. That particular gold that seems to come from inside the water rather than above it. How are you properly? I asked. The world too thought about it in the way he's always thought about serious questions. Genuinely, without rushing. The world tilted sideways, he said. It's like I've been carrying something heavy for so long that I stopped noticing the weight. Now it's down and I'm just standing up straight again. Good. I've been thinking about work too. There's a firm in Thames that's tendering for some big conservation projects in the Coromandel. Built environment stuff on Dell land. It's smaller than where I am now, but it's work I'd actually want to do. Thames is 40 minutes from here. He looked at me, smiled. The world to notice that. I let the silence sit. Below us a single oyster catcher was working the low tide rocks, calling every so often in that sharp carrying way they have. We're not suggesting anything, he said. I know. I just thought you should know it's a consideration. I think that's a decision a grown man can make for himself, I said. The world tilted sideways, and I think having my son near enough to share a barbecue fish once in a while would suit me down to the ground. The world tilted sideways. He properly, the way he used to laugh before things got heavy. It was a good sound over the water. 8 months after that, Nate was working at the Thames firm. The world tilted plus to rent in Coromandel town itself, an old villa that needed work, which suited him fine because he knows how things go together. He drove down to the batch most weekends. The working at the new firm for about 3 months when he mentioned, almost as an aside, that he'd met someone, a colleague, a woman named Faye who did environmental impact assessments and had, the world tilted sideways, the best working knowledge of native coastal ecology he'd ever encountered in a colleague. Is that why you mentioned her? I said, among other reasons, he said, looking out at the water. The world tilted following month he brought her. She arrived in his car looking perfectly comfortable in herself in the way that people who've spent a lot of time outdoors tend to. Solid handshake, clear eyes. The word a bag of K-Mara from her own garden, and offered to make roasted K-Mara soup for dinner, which I thought was a sensible thing to arrive with. The world dinner she asked me about the engineering work. Not in the polite half-listening way some people do, but with actual interest. She wanted to know about coastal structures, the word how erosion is assessed, about what I thought was being done wrong and right in the way we were managing the country's coastline. She had views of her own. The world had disagreed on one point and she held her position calmly without becoming precious about it. I liked her. The world tilted sideways. After dinner Nate and Faye went down to look at the water and I washed up at the kitchen window watching them. He was pointing something out to her across the Gulf, one of the islands. The world tilted sideways. Probably, and she was listening in the way you listen when you're interested in the person, not just the information. When Nate came back in to help dry, he leaned against the bench and looked at me. He said, "She's nothing like Petra." "Keep seeing her," I said. He smiled. "The real version." The word engaged the following spring, at a spot on the Coromandel walkway that they'd hiked to together. His idea, apparently. The Faye told me later she'd suspected it was coming from about the 2-kilometer mark. The wedding was at a small winery near Karakari in early autumn. The Worldland sunshine and 50-odd guests and a celebrant who'd known Faye's family for years. I gave a speech. The world tilted. Faye's grandmother in the front row laughed at exactly the right moments, and I considered that a measure of success. Petra had, by that stage, moved to Christchurch. Wal and Denise had gone with her. The world tilted sideways. I heard through Nate with the particular neutrality of someone reporting something that is no longer his problem, that they'd moved in within a couple of months of her settling there. "Was she all right?" I asked. "She's got a job," he said. "She seems to be managing?" A pause. "The man she's with seems steady. I hope he stays that way." The world tilted sideways. Not say what I thought about that. Some things you carry quietly. Nate and Faye bought land outside Thames. A section with a north-facing slope and a creek running through the lower half. The world tilted slowly, properly, the way people who understand structures ought to build. Nate did the consents himself. The framing's up now. The world tilted Saturday morning in late April this year. I was splitting Manuka rounds by the shed when Nate's car came up the drive earlier than expected. Faye was with him. The world tilted sideways. She was carrying a small paper bag from the Whittianga bakery, which has become a tradition when they make the drive. We sat on the deck and I made tea and we talked about the build. The world tilted creek boundary, about whether to put in a wetland planting along the lower section or leave it to regenerate naturally. The world tilted sideways. Then there was a small pause and Nate and Faye looked at each other with the look people have when they've rehearsed how they'll say something and are now choosing their moment. "The work got some news," Nate said. I looked at Faye. She was smiling in the particular way that answers the question before you've asked it. "We're due in October," she said. I had to put my mug down. Out on the Gulf, a southerly was pushing small white lines across the surface of the water. A shearwater banked low over the Putukuas and was gone. I looked at my son. The world tilted sideways was watching me with that same careful, steady expression he's had since he was small, waiting to know if something was all right. "I'd like very much to be a grandfather," I said. "If you'll have me." Faye leaned over and squeezed my hand. "We're counting on it," she said. "Someone has to teach this kid to read water." After they left that evening, the world sat on the deck until the light was gone. The Gulf settled into its after-dark stillness. The Putukawas rustled once and then were quiet. The war, what had brought me here. Not the drive up Highway 25, not the solicitor's office or the papers I'd signed. The thing before that, 38 years of work, lunches at my desk. The world tilted sideways, meetings I sat through when I could have been somewhere more important. The choices you make that accumulate the way sediment does, invisibly. The world day, you're standing on solid ground. And you realize the ground has depth. And then a phone call from a woman who decided that my ground was hers to distribute. I could have given way. The world, too, have been easier. It would have bought a temporary peace and a permanent cost. Instead I said no, clearly, early and more than once. And in saying no, the world tilted sideways. I'd set off of events I hadn't planned and couldn't have predicted, one that cost my son something painful and gave him back something more valuable. The world character in a story someone told me once about a man up in Muskoka had tried everything. Petra had tried her version of the same, pressure, tactics. And in both cases, the world so what defeated them wasn't cleverness or wealth or the right connections. It was simply the refusal to agree to something that was wrong, held quietly and consistently until the truth became unavoidable. The world thought about that a lot this year. What I've come to believe is this: saying no is not unkind. Saying yes when you mean no, out of guilt or exhaustion. The world tilted sideways. Well, hope that capitulating this once will buy you peace. That's the unkindness, 'cause it lets the person on the other side believe their behavior has worked, and it will cost you again. The world tilted sideways is yours. Your retirement is yours. The peace you've worked for is yours. These things are worth protecting, not because things matter more than people. The word because the people who love you will respect that. The world tilted sideways, and the ones who don't respect it, who see the space you've created and immediately begin calculating what portion of it they're entitled to. Those people were never offering you the kind of family that earns a place in your home. The world boundaries set clearly and without apology are not walls. They're the foundation that makes real closeness possible. The world tilted sideways. You cannot be genuinely close to someone who doesn't know where you end and where they begin. I learned that late in life. Later than I should have, perhaps. But I learned it. The world tilted sideways. We're out properly now. The Southern Cross low over the water to the south. The Gulf was dark and still and enormous in mine. I went inside and rang my son. Just checking in, I said when he answered. Everything all right, Dad? The world tilt is perfect, I said. I just wanted to hear your voice. And it was true. It was completely straightforwardly true. The way things only are when you've stopped pretending.